There is a strange moment that happens after awareness. Nothing outside announces it. Your life still looks the same room, the same routines, the same responsibilities waiting for you in the morning. But something is no longer identical. You, not the version of you others see, the version of you that sees yourself. Because once you realize you are living on autopilot, you cannot fully unsee it. You begin to notice the distance in real time. You notice when your voice doesn't sound like it belongs to you. You notice when your reactions feel rehearsed. You notice when your presence fades in the middle of your own life. And this is where most people become afraid. Not because something is wrong, but because something is returning. Not loudly, not completely, quietly. The part of you that existed before you learned to disappear. The part of you that did not calculate every word before speaking. The part of you that did not monitor every muscle before feeling it. The part of you that did not live in constant self-protection. For years, that part of you stayed hidden. Not gone, hidden. Because it was never safe enough to come forward. Autopilot was safer. Distance was safer. Numbness was safer. But safety came at a cost. It cost you your sense of authorship. Your sense that this was your life. Not just a life you were maintaining, but a life you were inside of. And now, for the first time in a long time, something inside you is asking a question. Not, what's wrong with me? But something far more dangerous. Is it too late to come back? The moment you ask if it's too late, something inside you shifts. Because that question does not come from the part of you that disappeared. It comes from the part of you that never did. For a long time, you may have believed that version of you was gone, replaced by someone quieter, more controlled, more distant, someone who learned how to exist without needing to feel fully present. And over time, that version became familiar, reliable, safe. But familiarity can be deceptive. Familiarity can convince you that something temporary was permanent, that something adaptive was original, that something learned was who you were always meant to be. But there is a reason the question appeared now. There is a reason you didn't ask it years ago, because asking that question requires awareness. And awareness requires enough distance from the pattern to see it clearly. You cannot question autopilot while you are fully inside it. You can only question it once something in you begins to wake up. That awakening does not immediately restore who you were. It reveals what has been waiting underneath. And what waits underneath is not untouched. It has been shaped by everything you survived, everything you adapted to, everything you endured in silence, which means you cannot go back to being who you were before. Not exactly. Because you are no longer the person who didn't know. You are the person who learned. And that creates a new question. Not whether you can go back, but whether you are willing to move forward as someone who is finally aware. Because awareness changes the relationship you have with yourself. It removes the illusion that your life is happening without you. It places you back inside it, not as the person you were before autopilot, but as someone who can choose whether it continues. Most people think coming back means returning to who they were before everything changed, before the numbness, before the distance, before the version of themselves that learned how to survive. They imagine recovery as restoration, as if somewhere inside them, their original self has been frozen in time, untouched, waiting to be reactivated. But that is not how identity works. You cannot return to who you were before awareness, because awareness changes you. Once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. Once you see how you disappeared, you cannot pretend you were always present. And this is not a loss. It is a transformation, because the person you were before autopilot did not understand what it meant to lose yourself. That version of you lived without knowing how fragile presence can be, without knowing how easily adaptation can replace authenticity, without knowing how survival can become identity. You know that now, and that knowledge changes the foundation you stand on. You are no longer trying to recover a past identity. You are building a conscious one, not built from protection, built from recognition. Recognition of what you felt, recognition of what you lost access to, recognition of what you had to become in order to remain here. This recognition creates something most people never experience: choice. Before awareness, your life was governed by patterns you did not see, patterns that decided how you responded, how you expressed yourself, how much of yourself you allowed to exist. But now those patterns are visible, and visibility weakens their control. Not immediately, not completely, but permanently. Because once you see that autopilot is not you, you stop fully identifying with it. You begin to notice when it speaks. You begin to notice when it takes over your reactions. You begin to notice when it replaces your presence. And noticing creates interruption. Interruption creates space. Space creates possibility. Possibility creates authorship. Authorship is the opposite of autopilot. Autopilot maintains continuity. Authorship creates direction. Autopilot repeats the past. Authorship allows something new to exist. This is where identity begins to rebuild. Not by forcing yourself to become someone else, but by allowing yourself to stop being only who you had to be. For years, your identity was shaped by necessity. Necessity to remain safe. Necessity to remain accepted. Necessity to remain functional. That necessity created a version of you that could survive. But survival is not the same as authorship. Survival maintains existence. Authorship creates meaning. And meaning cannot exist without participation. You cannot create meaning in your life while standing outside of it. You cannot create meaning while observing yourself from a distance. You cannot create meaning while assuming your role is only to maintain stability. Meaning requires risk. Not dramatic risk, emotional risk. The risk of being present when autopilot tells you to disappear. The risk of being honest when autopilot tells you to remain predictable. The risk of being visible when autopilot tells you to remain contained. These risks feel unfamiliar, not because they are dangerous, because they are new. And new experiences always feel uncertain. But uncertainty is where identity expands, not by abandoning the version of you that survived, but by integrating it, understanding it, respecting it, without allowing it to remain in control. Because the version of you that adapted deserves recognition. It carried you through moments where you did not know how else to exist. It protected you when a protection was necessary. It kept you here, but you are no longer limited to that version. You are the one who survived, and you are the one who became aware. That combination creates something powerful, not a return to who you were. The emergence of someone new, someone who can feel autopilot activate and still choose presence. Someone who can feel fear and still choose honesty. Someone who can feel distance and still choose connection. Not perfectly, but consciously. Conscious identity is different from adaptive identity. Adaptive identity reacts. Conscious identity responds. Adaptive identity protects. Conscious identity participates. Adaptive identity survives. Conscious identity lives. And living does not mean you will never feel numb again. It means numbness will no longer define you. It will no longer be invisible. It will no longer be mistaken for your personality. It will be seen for what it is, a pattern, a protection, a response that no longer has to decide your future. This is what it means to come back, not returning to who you were, returning to authorship over who you are becoming. There is a quiet grief that comes with realizing you can no longer be who you used to be. Not because that version was false, but because that version was unaware. Unaware of how much of its life was shaped by fear. Unaware of how often it chose safety over truth. Unaware of how easily it disappeared to maintain stability. For a long time, that unawareness protected you. It allowed you to function without questioning everything. It allowed you to continue without confronting what you had lost. But now that protection is gone, you see it. You see the moments where you abandoned your own voice. You see the moments where you agreed when you meant no. You see the moments where you stayed present physically but left emotionally. Not because you were weak, because you were protecting yourself. And that realization creates conflict, not between who you are and who you were, but between who you are becoming and who you had to be. Because the version of you built for survival still exists. It still knows how to take control. It still knows how to make you smaller. It still knows how to keep you safe by keeping you distant. It still whispers familiar instructions. Don't say too much. Don't feel too deeply. Don't risk being seen. Don't risk being real. And those instructions feel convincing. Not because they are true, because they are practiced. They are the language of your protection. They are the voice that kept you here. And letting go of that voice can feel like betrayal. Betrayal of the person you needed to be to survive. Because survival demanded sacrifices. Sacrifices of honesty. Sacrifices of expression. Sacrifices of presence. You gave up parts of yourself to remain intact. You gave up spontaneity to remain accepted. You gave up vulnerability to remain safe. And now awareness asks something difficult. It asks you to stop living entirely inside those sacrifices, not to erase them, but to stop letting them define your limits. This is where most people hesitate, not because they want to remain disconnected, because they are afraid of losing the structure that held them together. Because autopilot created stability, and stability became familiar, even if it was empty, even if it was distant, even if it did not feel like home. Familiar emptiness can feel safer than unfamiliar presence, because presence requires uncertainty. Presence requires participation. Presence requires responsibility. Responsibility for what you say. Responsibility for what you feel. Responsibility for what you allow in your life. When you live on autopilot, responsibility feels distant because your life feels predetermined. But when you become aware, responsibility returns, not as pressure, as authorship. Authorship means you are no longer only reacting to what exists. You are participating in what becomes. And participation is vulnerable because it removes the illusion that your life is happening without your consent. It reminds you that you are here, not just physically, but consciously. You begin to notice choices that autopilot would have made for you. Choices to remain silent. Choices to remain distant. Choices to remain invisible. And now those choices no longer feel automatic. They feel optional. That shift is unsettling because it removes the certainty of who you were. But it also creates the possibility of who you can become. Not as a performance, not as a role, as a person. A person who is no longer defined only by adaptation. A person who is no longer defined only by protection. A person who can exist without constant self-abandonment. This does not mean the old version of you disappears. It remains part of your history, part of your nervous system, part of your memory. There will still be moments where autopilot activates, moments where distance feels easier, moments where numbness feels safer. But something is different now. You see it, and seeing it changes your relationship to it. You are no longer trapped inside it. You are standing beside it. You are no longer only the person who disappears. You are the person who notices the disappearance. And that awareness interrupts the inevitability, because what is seen cannot fully control you without your participation. This is the collapse of unconscious identity. Not dramatic, not sudden, gradual, irreversible. You cannot unknow yourself. You cannot return to complete unawareness. You cannot fully believe the old story again. The story that you are naturally distant. The story that you are naturally numb. The story that this is simply who you are. Because now you know the truth. You were never meant to remain hidden inside your own life. You were never meant to exist only in survival. You were never meant to remain someone who disappeared to remain safe. You became that person for a reason, but you do not have to remain that person forever. This is the moment where identity stops being something you inherited and becomes something you choose, not in one decision, in many small ones. Each time you remain present when autopilot invites you to leave. Each time you tell the truth when autopilot offers you safety. Each time you allow yourself to exist without shrinking. These moments seem small, but they change your direction, because identity is not built in one transformation. It is built in repeated participation. Participation in your own life. Participation in your own experience. Participation in your own existence. And the more you participate, the less convincing the old identity becomes. Not because you destroyed it, because you outgrew it, because it no longer reflects who you are aware of being. You are no longer only the person who survived. You are the person who returned. And return does not mean going back. It means finally arriving. Returning to yourself does not feel the way you imagined it would. It does not feel like certainty. It does not feel like sudden clarity. It feels unfamiliar, because for so long you lived in reaction. You lived in response to expectations, response to pressure, response to the silent need to remain acceptable. And when you stop reacting automatically, there is a space where the old instructions no longer arrive, a space where no one tells you who to be. At first, that space can feel empty, not peaceful, undefined, because you are no longer being guided by survival. You are being guided by awareness, and awareness does not give commands. It gives choice. Choice can feel overwhelming when you're not used to having it, because choice means you are no longer hiding inside the life that happened to you. You are standing inside the life that is happening through you. For years, you became someone who knew how to disappear without leaving. You knew how to stay in the room, but not fully exist in it. You knew how to speak without revealing yourself. You knew how to function without participating. And those abilities protected you. They allowed you to continue. They allowed you to remain intact. But they also convinced you that distance was your nature. That numbness was your personality. That disconnection was permanent. Now you begin to see that none of it was permanent. It was practiced. And what was practiced can be replaced, not by forcing yourself to become someone else, but by allowing yourself to stop abandoning what was always yours. Your presence. Presence is not something you create. It is something you stop suppressing. It is what remains when you no longer interrupt your own experience. You begin to notice it in small moments, moments where you feel something and do not immediately translate it into something safer. Moments where you speak and recognize your voice as your own. Moments where you exist without watching yourself from the outside. These moments can feel fragile because they are new, but they are also familiar in a deeper way. Familiar to the part of you that existed before survival became your identity. You are not inventing someone new. You are allowing someone real to remain. Not perfectly, not constantly, but honestly. And honesty changes your relationship to yourself. You begin to trust your reactions again. You begin to trust your emotions again. You begin to trust your presence again. Not because fear disappears, but because fear no longer defines your limits. You realize that the person you became to survive deserves compassion, not rejection. That person carried you through uncertainty. That person protected you when you needed protection. That person kept you here long enough for you to see clearly. And now you carry them forward differently, not as your identity, as your history. You stop asking yourself how to go back, and you begin asking yourself how to move forward without leaving yourself behind. This is what it means to come back. Not to erase who you became, but to stop living as if survival is your only purpose, because survival was the beginning of your story, not the end of it. There is a moment when you realize you are no longer waiting to become yourself. You are already here, not fully formed, not fully certain, but present. And presence changes everything. Because for most of your life, you experienced yourself as someone you were trying to manage, someone you were trying to control, someone you were trying to keep acceptable. You monitored your emotions. You filtered your reactions. You adjusted your truth before it could fully exist. Not because you were dishonest, because you were protecting your place in the world. Protection became your responsibility, and responsibility became your identity. But now something is different. You are no longer only protecting yourself. You are seeing yourself, seeing what you feel, seeing what you want, seeing what you avoided, and seeing creates a new relationship. You stop relating to yourself as a problem to fix. You begin relating to yourself as someone to understand. Understanding does not erase your past. It integrates it. It allows you to see that every version of you had a reason to exist. Every adaptation had a purpose. Every distance had a function. Nothing about you was random. Nothing about you was broken. Everything about you was responsive. And now you are no longer only responding. You are choosing to remain present when escape feels easier. Choosing to remain honest when silence feels safer. Choosing to remain visible when invisibility feels familiar. These choices are quiet. No one announces them. No one rewards them. But they change your life from the inside. Because identity is not built through dramatic transformation. It is built through repeated permission. Permission to exist as you are. Permission to feel without explanation. Permission to move forward without abandoning yourself. This is where authorship becomes real, not as an idea, as a practice. You stop waiting for clarity before you allow yourself to live. You allow yourself to live, and clarity begins to follow. You stop waiting to feel ready. You accept that readiness was never the requirement. Presence was. You begin to understand that you were never behind. You were adapting. And adaptation kept you here long enough to reclaim yourself. Not as who you were, as who you are now. Someone who knows what it means to disappear. And chose to return anyway. There is no dramatic moment that announces your return. No single morning where you wake up and suddenly feel complete. No clear line between who you were and who you are now. What changes is quieter than that. You stop looking for yourself in the distance. You begin to recognize yourself in the present, not in perfection, in participation. You notice it in the way you remain inside a moment instead of escaping it. You notice it in the way your reactions begin to feel honest instead of automatic. You notice it in the way your life no longer feels like something happening around you. It begins to feel like something happening with you, through you, because the person you were waiting to become was never ahead of you. They were underneath the protection, underneath the adaptation, underneath the years you spent surviving. And now survival is no longer your only language. You begin to understand something most people never realize. You were never late. You were never behind. You were becoming someone with awareness. Awareness of what it costs to abandon yourself. Awareness of what it means to return. And once you return even partially, you cannot unknow the way back. Life does not become easier, but it becomes yours. The numbness may still visit you. The distance may still appear. Autopilot may still offer you its familiar protection, but it no longer defines you. Because now you can see it. And seeing it means you can choose, not always perfectly, but consciously. You are no longer someone lost inside yourself. You are someone who knows what it means to come back. And that changes how you walk forward. Because this was never just about escaping numbness. It was about remembering that your life was never meant to be lived without you. And this is where most people ask the wrong question. They ask, what do I do now? But this was never about doing. It was about seeing. Because once you see yourself clearly, the next steps do not come from instruction. They come from recognition. Recognition of what feels real. Recognition of what feels true. Recognition of what no longer feels like your life. And that recognition will continue to unfold, not in one moment, in many. There will be days when you feel fully present, and days when you feel yourself disappear again. Not because you failed, because you are human. Because awareness is not a destination. It is a relationship you will continue to deepen. And there are parts of that journey we have not explored yet. Parts about why you learned to disconnect in the first place. Parts about why modern life makes disappearance feel normal. Parts about why some people never realized they were gone. Parts about what it means to build a life that no longer requires your absence. You may begin to notice those questions now, not as problems, as invitations. Invitations to understand yourself more deeply. Invitations to see parts of your story you could not see before. Invitations to continue this return. You'll find those explorations here on this channel, in the other videos waiting for you, because this was never the end of something. It was the moment you realized you were still here. And once you realize that, you stop searching for a way to become someone else. You begin allowing yourself to become someone true.